Hey everybody, I'm back with another tutorial. You've spoken and I've listened, and I got myself a better microphone here. Let me know what you guys think in the comments, and let's get started. So in the world of post-production, when the director is sitting with the editor and when they're cutting a scene together, sometimes the director will say that they don't like a performance that the actor is doing. It can be a stammer, it could be an awkward blink. Sometimes it can be an actor is looking around when they're supposed to be focused on the performance of the opposite actor. So what they'll do is they'll look at the shot in the timeline and decide where they want to remove the performance with a start frame and an end frame. And they'll use something called a fluid morph to attach those frames using vectors in Avid. And what'll happen is it'll usually be used as a temp and then sent to visual effects, and then we use that as a reference for timing. Nuke gives us a lot of flexibility when it comes to vectors. So in this shot here, we have a person in a warehouse doing an ollie, and it's kind of just a little 3-inch ollie. Let's say the director said, you know what, I actually want to remove that ollie, but I want to keep the shot 151 frames. How would you go about doing that? In Nuke, I would probably find a part of the shot where he is about to start preparing for the ollie, which is frame 30, so he hasn't bent his legs yet. And then maybe frame 122 is where he completes the ollie. And then I would use something called a morph dissolve, which allows us to attach 2 frames in Nuke using vectors. So I would put a keyframe here and then move over to frame 122 and put a keyframe right there. I'm going to set it to Chronos, vector and strength to 2. I'll put a switch down here. At frame 30, I'm going to have the pipe switch over to 1. And then at frame 122, I'm going to bring it back to 0. So everything before frame 30 is going to be the original plate, and then that switch is switching over to the morph dissolve happening. So this morph dissolve has helped me out a lot. It's from the Nuke Survival Toolkit. If you look under the hood, you could see that it's basically trying to align up vectors using Chronos as an engine under the hood. It's an amazing tool, and it's got me out of a lot of hairy situations, but for it to remove 92 frames, is going to be asking a lot of it. Usually fluid morphs can kind of range from a couple frames all the way to a couple seconds. A fluid morph that is 92 frames is kind of unheard of. And you can see the morph dissolve is doing the best job it can, but unfortunately it's not doing as good a job as we need it to do. So now here's where Comfy comes in. What we want to do is render out these frames just as JPEGs, and then we're going to bring these frames over to Comfy. So here's our Comfy workflow. This was a workflow provided by Benji's AI Playground. Definitely check him out on YouTube. This guy puts out a ton of tutorials a week and provides all of his workflows available for free on Patreon. So I'm going to be using his workflow here in order to achieve the fluid morph we want. And since we're in Comfy, it's no longer called a fluid morph. It's actually called a first last frame video generation. Comfy's still pretty new, and I'm very much still learning how everything works in here. If you look at this image here, we have a first frame and a last frame. So the first frame, that is frame 30, is being encoded into latent space, and then frame 122 is also being encoded into latent space and then decoded. So it's almost like there's 2 operations happening here and they're meeting in the middle. And what Comfy does is that it gives us control as it moves its way through the encoder into the latent space and into the decoder. So here's where we load the latent diffusion model. And what this model allows us to do is define how the noise is going to be removed over time in latent space. If you're working with a lower grade GPU, you could also bring this down to FP8, but we're going to work in FP16. What the clip does is allow us text to latent encoding. So basically we can guide our data using prompt-based conditioning. And then over here is the VAE. So the VAE stands for Variational Autoencoder. This is where it converts the images into the latents. So all this process works together with the text prompt to make its way into the latent space and gets decoded. So the image is effectively getting scrambled and then decoded back into values that we understand, which is RGB. Usually for text prompts, I try to keep it as simple as possible. It never works as well as you want it to. I've had times where I want the camera just to be static, and for some reason it'll give me handheld after I tell it not to do that multiple times. What I'm finding more and more in Comfy is for stuff like this, you basically want to set up many renders overnight. But just know that Comfy is something you want to set up and walk away from and do other things and just come back later. Down here is where we put the start and end images. So the start image, remember, was frame 30, and the last image was frame 122. What's happening over here is that we're actually resizing the image because Comfy Works better in lower resolutions. Comfy is very expensive when it comes to resources like VRAM. So in order for us not to crash, we're going to set this down to 1280 by 720. For it to process those 92 frames took maybe an hour to 90 minutes. If we were to bring this down to 960 by 40, it would be even faster. And then throughout the build, I put in these purge VRAM nodes. So these basically help us not to crash. It'll dump the VRAM after a node that is very costly in resources. Up here is the Tcache node. So what I'm finding online is that this Tcache node may have been provided by Kijai a while ago as part of a tool set. And since then he has updated his tool set and the Tcache node is no longer there. So I'm learning that some people have this, some people don't. I don't even know how I got it, quite frankly. But if you have it, it enables to dump resources as it moves forward into the latent space. So everything is prepping the images to go into our latent space here in the WAN first last frame to video. And then it goes into latent space here with the K sampler. So the image is effectively getting scrambled here and then decoded in the VAE decode. What I'm finding is in the K sampler, the steps above 40 yield a much more real result along with a higher CFG of 4 or 5. If you want to have a lot of fun, set your steps down to maybe 10 and your CFG down to 1, and you'll get some pretty psychedelic results. But if you want something a little bit more concrete, you're going to want to increase these values. And you may have to run this a couple times before you find a happy medium that you like. And then this gets put into the VAE decode. So the VAE decode converts latents into pixel space images. So this is basically unscrambling the image from the K sampler and putting it back into data that we can see, which is RGB values. And then over here, I put a save EXR and a write to video. So somebody asked me how to render from Comfy. You can put down a save EXR node, or you can also put down a write to video. The write to video is part of the WAS node suite, and it allows you to output in different compressions. I hid this node over here because this is our output. This video combined from the video helper suite allowed me to output it into pro resolution. And so you want to render a bunch of outputs overnight, just know that if you hit run right here, it'll start initializing the nodes. So if I were to hit this maybe 3 more times, over here in the node queue, we have 4 more renders set up here, which will definitely take a couple hours. So a good way to work with Comfy is to set up the renders overnight. Then by morning, you probably have like 10 to 15 of them, and maybe 3 or 4 of them will be okay. Or you may like the first half of one with the second half of another. And that's where you take all those shots and then you go into compositing. So from here, let's go back to Nuke. So here we are back in Nuke. Here is our output, which I'm honestly really surprised by. There's even a little bit of a pump in there. Definitely impressed by Comfy's outputs here. Since we output it in 1280 by 720, I ran it through the upscaler, which brings it up to 2560 by 1440. Which is bigger than our original shot. So let's go ahead and just bring this back down to 1920 by 1080. And then remember, our first frame that this starts on, it says here it starts on frame 1, but we know that it actually starts on frame 30. There's a couple different ways to push this to frame 30. You could do it right here in the read node. If you click this, you can go to start at frame 30. But honestly, for me, it's in best practices to put down a time offset node. And then you set this to 30. And this is really for other people to see what you're doing. If someone were to pick up this project file and to keep moving forward with work, they can see exactly what you did here, which is put down a time offset. And now I'm going to put down a new switch. And I'm also going to put down a frame range node. And the frame range is going to last the entirety of the clip, which is 151 frames. So when we view through here, our timeline is going to consistently stay at 151 frames. And then here at frame 30, we're going to be switching over to our output from Comfy. And then at frame 122, we're going to come back. So this is pretty awesome. Comfy has effectively removed the ollie that kid did and then filled in the frames in between that we needed it to. If we were to send this out for paint and ask a facility to paint in 92 frames for us, it would have cost thousands of dollars, with a ton of paint and tracking work and masking. But Comfy did it fairly quickly for us. And I can't stress it enough. Like, Comfy is an amazing resource and people should be picking it up and using it. If you're working with a director that wanted to remove someone's performance across many seconds of footage, we could do that. And I always tell people, if you're an editor, director, producer, whatever, if you pick up Comfy and you become aware of how powerful its tools are, that will make you a better filmmaker. Things never go correctly on set. And if you know that you have these tools in your back pocket that can help you in post, you are set. All right, well, that's all for now. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below, and let me know what tutorials you guys want to see in the future. I'll also provide a link to Benji's workflow on his Patreon down below. Definitely check out his stuff. That guy is really amazing, and we're really lucky to have him as a resource. All right, that's it for now. See you guys in the next one.